Thấy chỗ nào không thoải mái nói chị nha.
Dạ. about who's really under arrest. The flashing red and blue lights bounced off the houses as 2 squad cars came to a stop in Jake's driveway. The mustached man and his 2 lackeys looked like they had just been caught breaking into a bank. Their self-assured posturing vanished the moment Deputy Carter stepped out of his vehicle, one hand resting on his duty belt. Carter took in the scene, Jake still holding one of the fake cops pinned against the hood of a car, and the other 2 standing frozen in place. He raised an eyebrow. "Boss, you mind telling me why you're wrestling with a guy wearing what looks like a Halloween police costume?" Jake finally let the squirming man go, stepping back and brushing his hands off. These 3 gentlemen were in the middle of conducting an unlawful arrest. Figured I'd save them the trouble of doing it the hard way. Carter let out a low whistle, turning to the trio. "All right, let's see some IDs." The mustached man tried to regain his composure, straightening his cheap polyester uniform. "There's been a misunderstanding. We are authorized HOA enforcement officers, and we were carrying out our duties." Carter stared at him for a moment, then slowly reached out and plucked the man's shiny badge from his chest. He turned it over in his hands, examining the poorly engraved letters that read ACHY Compliance Officer. He looked back up at Jake. "This is a joke, right?" Jake smirked. "I wish." The mustached man puffed up his chest again. "We have full legal authority to issue citations and enforce community standards." Carter remained unimpressed. "Yeah. And which department issued these fancy badges?" The man faltered. "The Homeowners Association Security Division." Carter snorted. "That's not a thing." The second lackey, still rubbing his wrist from Jake's takedown, jumped in. "It is. We were given jurisdiction over all properties in this neighborhood." Carter tilted his head. "Jurisdiction? Is that right?" He turned to Jake. "Boss, did you sign off on that?" Jake smiled. "Nope." Carter gave the mustached man a long look. "Well then, I guess you're just some guys running around playing dress-up." The mustached man's face darkened. "You don't understand. We were only enforcing compliance. We have every right to detain rule-breakers." Jake stepped closer. "Detain? You were trying to arrest me. Over a mailbox." The mustached man hesitated, clearly realizing how ridiculous it sounded. "Well, technically." Jake's voice turned steel-cold. "There's no technically about it. You tried to put cuffs on me. That's impersonating law enforcement. And depending on how you plan to detain me, we could be talking about unlawful restraint. Or worse." Carter folded his arms. "So let's start with some real names and real IDs." The 3 men hesitated before reluctantly handing over their wallets. Carter flipped through them, then gave Jake a look. "You're gonna love this. Not a single one of them is a registered security guard. They don't even have basic certifications." Jake sighed. "You telling me they're not even rent-a-cops?" Carter shook his head. "Nope. Just some guys in cheap uniforms playing sheriff." The mustached man shifted uncomfortably. "Look, we were just following orders." Jake narrowed his eyes. "Whose orders?" The man hesitated. "The HOA board." Jake crossed his arms. "Got any paperwork to prove that?" The second lackey quickly reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled document, handing it over. Carter took one look and scoffed. "This isn't a contract. It's a volunteer neighborhood watch form." Jake glanced over it, shaking his head. "So let me get this straight. You 3 decided that meant you could run around pretending to be cops and extorting homeowners." The mustached man's lips pressed into a thin line. "It wasn't extortion. It was community enforcement." Jake gave him a hard stare. "How much were you charging people for these violations?" The lackeys exchanged nervous glances, but no one spoke. Jake exhaled through his nose. "Deputy, let's check their vehicle." Carter nodded and walked over to the HOA-branded SUV parked by the curb. He pulled open the door, rifling through the contents. A moment later, he let out a low whistle. Well. We've got ticket books, fine notices, and would you look at that, a cash box." Jake turned to the mustached man. You running an HOA or a roadside scam? The man swallowed hard. We were just collecting fees. Jake shook his head. No. What you were doing was fraud. The second lackey blurted out. We were told to do it. The board promised us a cut. Jake exchanged a glance with Carter. Now we're getting somewhere. Carter flipped through a ledger he had pulled from the SUV. They've been hitting the whole neighborhood. Fake fines, intimidation tactics, even threats of foreclosure. Jake let out a slow sigh. And people actually paid them? Carter nodded. Looks like it. Jake turned back to the three men. So here's what's going to happen. You're all being detained while we investigate. If you're lucky, you'll just be looking at fraud charges. If we find out you threatened or coerced anyone into paying, it's going to get a whole lot worse. The mustached man tried to protest. You can't arrest us for enforcing community rules. Jake gave him a dry look. Watch me. Carter stepped forward, pulling out a set of real handcuffs. All right, boys, turn around. The mustached man opened his mouth to argue, but when Carter raised an eyebrow, he slowly complied. The two lackeys followed, both looking thoroughly defeated as Carter cuffed them and started reading them their rights.